All right, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the webinar today that is going to provide an overview of the commissioning of out-of-home care services for Aboriginal community controlled organisations. My name is Mark Burgess, I'm the Executive Director for Strategy, and I have been the project lead for the last kind of 6 to 9 months around this piece of work, and I'm joined today by Amber Fabry, who is the Executive Director of the Specialist Child Protection Unit, and Amber and I will be working together as we move forward on this very important piece of work. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we are here in Walyulup on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay respects to elders past and present. And I'd also like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the land on which you're all joining from across this great vast state of ours here today, and acknowledge your traditional owners past and present. Today we'll be sharing with you an overview of the work that we have been doing as part of the out-of-home care services commissioning project, and to provide you with some details about how it is we want to move forward jointly with yourselves as Aboriginal community controlled organisations into the future. Another important piece of work which is very complementary to what we have been doing in the out-of-home care services commissioning project is that around the Aboriginal community controlled organisation strategy, and we have today with us Margaret Collard and Jade Cass, who will also be providing you with some information on where we're up to with that particular project too. I've also asked Amanda McCurry, Executive Manager for Service Delivery from Yorganup, to present to you on the experiences as the current only ACCO provider in out-of-home care here in Western Australia, and she'll be joined by her colleagues Marie and Ginny, and they'll take you through some of their experiences as an ACCO, and not only the great work that they've been doing, but also to give you an indication of some of the challenges that are faced in this space. And we look forward to hearing from you guys shortly. Then there would be an opportunity for you guys to ask any questions that you have. Similar to the last time we came together, we encourage you to ask questions in the chat box, and those questions will be asked as part of the Q&A session. The questions will only be moderated to ensure that there's no double ups, and if we don't get an opportunity to get to all of the questions today, we will provide answers to them out of session as soon as possible following this event. We would also encourage you to like any questions, and that way that'll really help us try and prioritise the questions throughout the webinar. So today is the initial step in supporting ACCOs to deliver out-of-home care services, and following today's session we'll be in contact with all organisations individually to understand how best we can move forward together to deliver better outcomes for Aboriginal children in out-of-home care. So firstly, I'm going to start with a bit of a presentation which tells you and gives you a bit of a journey as to how we got to where we are at the moment with the out-of-home care commissioning project. This project is particularly started as part of a commissioning cycle. The out-of-home care services is one of 4 priority commissioning areas that the Department of Communities is currently undertaking. The other 3 being homelessness, family and domestic violence, as well as child sexual abuse treatment services. And part of the work that we have been doing is to look to engage with the non-government sector and Aboriginal community controlled organisations to look at how we need to move forward and how we need to do things differently as we look to commission out-of-home care services moving forward. And as part of that, we've held a number of labs, which I'll talk to in a minute. But for us, as part of this commissioning process, there are 4 types of care that we're really keen to look at exploring commissioning from the sector and from Aboriginal community controlled organisations. The first type of care is around temporary care homes. Now this is a 3-month care arrangement for children who enter care. Ideally, this is about placement for sibling groups so that they can remain together when they first come into care. Temporary care homes will be located within specific child protection districts to ensure that children remain connected to community, to culture, to family, and to other really important parts of their life. So then when they originally come into care, we can continue to keep connection to as much of that as possible. And we know from our experience and from research how important that is when children first come into care, that those connections are maintained. And that's very much what that care type is about doing and maintaining. The second is community-based care. This is very much around the traditional community-based foster care model, where foster carers are assessed and provide care to children within their own homes. Particularly when we're talking about Aboriginal children as we move forward into this commissioning space, we're also talking about those remaining with family and how family is supported to remain engaged with those children. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The third type of care that we're looking at is called group foster care. Within the current contracting arrangements, we call this family group care, but really where we're looking for a group home care for children, up to 4 children, possibly more, again with a preference for sibling groups and keeping sibling groups together in a group care setting, where there is no time limit. So this may be 6 months, it may be 12 months, it may be 4 years. It really depends on what is in the best interest of the children and what is deemed most suitable for them moving forward. And then the final type of care that we're looking at commissioning is around complex care. And this is about niche care arrangements for children with more complex needs. So when we talk about complex care arrangements, we're particularly talking about placements where there might only be one child in that placement, but there might be numerous supports put into the placement to ensure that the needs of the child are met and that the child is fully supported within a particular placement. So they're the 4 types of care that I'll talk to throughout some of this brief presentation this afternoon, I should say. But really now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the engagement that we've been doing with the sector and with some Aboriginal community controlled organisations to get to the place where we're at the moment. So we've held 3 design labs already, and with 2 labs or workshops, particularly for Aboriginal community controlled organisations. We've held a number of meetings with key stakeholders to really look at identifying what the concerns are and the opportunities as we move forward into the commissioning of out-of-home care services. We've looked at workshops with service providers around looking at things such as decision-making closest to the child. So these are really looking at issues which are about how the system itself will operate as we move forward into these new contracts. So not necessarily things that are going to be a part of the new contracts, but really how the system needs to operate to support these new contracts in the future. As you would all be aware, because you're all here today, we did do the release of the expression of interest to ACCOs, and I really thank all of you for your response and interest in this. And we're obviously doing this workshop on the back of that. We've also got Paxton Consulting that have been appointed to develop and manage the procurement process. This is to make sure that we this is a large procurement process. It's a different way of doing things. It does mean changing the way that we have done things in the past, which I think is a real positive, and certainly that is a response from those who we've been engaging with. But Paxton will be there to ensure that we've got someone dedicated to moving all of the things forward that we need to do over the coming months. And we've also released some draft financial parameters and assumptions for feedback from the sector. And there'll be another session next Thursday specifically around those financial assumptions, which all of you will be invited to if you haven't been already. And when I talked about the expression of interest, I was really heartened to know that 44 responses to the expression of interest we had from those of you here today. It was great that all of the responses covered every bit of the country, of this vast state. And you can see there a little bit of the analysis of where some of the respondents are from. But as I said, great to see that each region is covered by respondents here and joining with us today. So that's really, really great to see. I mentioned before, and I'm only just going to touch on this briefly, that we released to the community services sector back in January for feedback some draft out-of-home care financial parameters and assumptions that the department had made. And we're currently working through some of the questions from the sector on this, which is why we have the information session next Thursday, the 10th of March, to really talk through the financial modelling and to answer some of those queries. As I said, you should have received an invitation to this session, and if not, please contact the email address you see there, which is commissioning@communities.wa.gov.au. I'm not going to labour on this point at the moment because there is information out there on this already. But just so everyone is on the same page and everyone is aware, these were the pricing assumptions the Department of Communities put out to the sector in January, and just making sure that everyone is across the same. So from a temporary care houses perspective, the assumptions made by the department around the pricing was approximately $252,000 per house. And again, for community group care, $633,000 per house. For community-based foster care, it was $64,000 per child, and complex community care was $643,000 per child. And again, there's a breakdown there of the different components of the assumptions that have been made, estimated assumptions by the department. We'll talk some more next week in the financial session as to how we feel, and respond to some of the queries that we've had, and also what this means for any tenders moving forward. It should note that none of these prices include regional loading, and there will be regional loading for different regions around the state, depending on the geographical location. As well, on top of the pricing, the assumed pricing per placement type or care type, there is also going to be individual funding per child for what we call a needs assessment level. Now, each child in care undergoes a needs assessment tool, and that through that process, there's a particular level that each child is assessed as being at, and depending on the level of the child, there is a certain amount of funding that will also be attached to that child to meet the needs of the individual needs of that child and the additional needs. And as you can see, NAT level 5 really talks to the complexity and the needs of those children that we have within the out-of-home care system, and the various needs that they have. And we'll talk more again. I don't want to get too much into the financial stuff today. We have a specific session next week for that, but really making sure that everyone is on the, has a broad overview of what we presented so far. And certainly, as I said, when we talk about NAT level 5, we're really talking about children and young people that have complex or extremely complex needs that have a significant impact on multiple areas of functioning. And that goes through different areas, and we go to NAT level 3, where a child or young person's behaviour and associated needs require regular additional support and management, through to NAT level 1, where a child or young person's behaviour is within the usual range for a child or young person. And again, we will talk in more detail about this next week, but really just giving people a bit of an overview as to how we've got to some of those. And I really won't kind of harbour on as to how we reached those ones. And again, we'll talk to more of those ones next week. So what do we hope to achieve? with our engagement with the Aboriginal community controlled organisations, we're really wanting to look at increasing the number of Aboriginal community controlled organisations that are providing out-of-home care. If someone asked me personally what was my hope at the end, my hope would be that we can at least have one Aboriginal community controlled organisation per region providing out-of-home care services across our whole state, at least, if not more. That what we're really hoping to achieve through our engagement with Aboriginal community controlled organisations is talking about place-based Aboriginal-led care. So what is going to work for those regions around the state, and what is it that Aboriginal community controlled organisations can tell us about what needs to happen within their own communities. As I said, that is about service provision across the state. That there are partnerships between ACCOs, ACCOs supporting ACCOs, and Yorganup, as I said, we have Yorganup with us today, are going to talk to more of their experience in this space. That there might be, partnerships where Aboriginal community controlled organisations might want to partner with community service organisations. And certainly what we're hoping to achieve is minimum principles for which those partnerships occur. And ensuring that those partnerships really look towards a place where Aboriginal community controlled organisations, by the end of those contracts, are the sole operator of those contracts as well. So really looking at partnerships which really move to a space where ACCOs become the main provider towards the end of those contracts or throughout the life of those contracts. And really what we're looking to achieve as well through this process is the increased support of kinship care and the support of kinship care by Aboriginal community controlled organisations across the state. So what's our plan? Well, our plan is, it starts today with you guys. It starts through these engagements around having the direct engagement with interested Aboriginal community controlled organisations. It's those individual conversations that are going to occur with each of you after today to really talk through the models and the services and what support is required for yourselves, and whether that support's something that the department can do, something that Yorganup can do, or something that either another ACCO or a community service organisation can do. Our plan is a commitment to transitioning services over time. So really looking at making sure that this is the start of building upon a process where ACCOs are supporting Aboriginal children in care, and as we move forward. As I said, we've got an experienced ACCO in Yorganup here to support the work around the state if that is something that organisations want, and certainly we'll be working with Yorganup about how that might look. And obviously, and I've mentioned this previously, is around, each region is different. Each region's needs are different. Each region's requirements from the amount of placements is different as well. And so certainly looking at getting a regional approach to the way that we deliver these services. And our plan is also to have a direct a procurement approach to commissioning services with Aboriginal community controlled organisations. And when I say direct approach procurement to the commissioning for ACCOs, I'm talking about the fact that we want to do an approach that means that Aboriginal community controlled organisations won't be required to formally respond to tenders. What it will mean is that, if we can go to the next slide, what it'll mean is that, we'll start talking to you about what does that look like? How will you deliver those services? What is the information that you'll report back? How much do you think it has cost? What does the model look like? What does your staffing look like? How is it that you think you're going to be able to really deliver on those services in the community, and kind of looking at the qualifications and experiences of those involved. So it is about the start of a conversation that really looks to us gauging your interest in this, gauging your yourself and your board's willingness to kind of look at coming into this space and what that looks like for each organisation, whether that's from starting small to really looking at jumping in and delivering these services as we start to roll out these new contracts in 2023. And again, that will be an individual approach and an individual's discussion that we will have as part of this process. So I feel like I've talked a lot already, and there are other people that I think it's important that you also hear from today as well. We will, as I said, get to some questions later, but I'd now like to introduce Margaret Collard, who's the Executive Director of Aboriginal Outcomes, and Jay Cass, the Project Manager, to provide an update on communities, Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation Strategy.
Thank you, Mark. Hi everyone, my name is Jade Cass and I am the Project Manager of the Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation Strategy within the Aboriginal Outcomes Division of the Department of Communities. Before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that I'm meeting on today, the Whadjuk Noongar people, but also to pay my respects to elders past and present of both this country and the country of wherever you may be joining us from. So today I'm here to talk to you about the department's ACO strategy, which we are currently developing. So as WA's most major human services department, it's really critical that the department has a way in which we are able to engage Aboriginal community controlled organisations to deliver culturally appropriate services to our children, families and communities. The department, when mogged in 2017, we inherited the ACO strategy that was developed by the former Child Protection Department. Excuse me, I know that's not what they were called. I'm from the housing arm, so just excuse me for that. But what we realised was that only covered a portion of our services that we delivered across the agency. So in 2019, communities commenced the development of an ACO strategy that we aim will improve the way that communities commissions and delivers services to Aboriginal children, families and communities, while supporting the development of ACOs to increase their capability and to deliver place-based culturally appropriate services across WA. So we have had 11 ACOs represented across the state on a project working group since the end of 2019. And that's to ensure that we'd have a broad cross-section of involvement in development of this strategy. So if we can just, yep, thank you. So obviously, as we commenced in 2019, that was prior to the launch of the refresh of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. However, we're very mindful that this is a major reform piece for government. So we've been sure to align that strategically with the work that we're doing in the development of the ACO strategy, particularly around Priority Reform Area 2, which is building the community controlled sector. The ACO strategy for the Department of Communities will be one of our major enablers in making sure that we are able to reach our required outcomes for that priority reform area. But not only is Priority Reform Area 2 important, Communities is responsible for leading a number of outcomes of the 17 socio-economic target outcomes that we have across the agreement. And that includes outcome 3, which is that Aboriginal children are engaged in high quality, culturally appropriate early childhood education in their early years. Outcome 9A, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people secure appropriate affordable housing that is aligned with their priorities and need. Outcome 12, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are not overrepresented in the child protection system. And outcome 13, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and households are always safe. We also support on a number of the other outcomes, but being the largest human services agency in Western Australia, it's essential that we're across all socio-economic targets that are represented in the national agreement. So The work that has been done by the project working group over the last couple of years has been absolutely instrumental in developing this strategy. I am fortunate enough that whilst the project manager, I am also the co-chair of the project working group. My fellow co-chair is Jocelyn Eads-Tass, and who is a member with Dream a Dream Foundation. So I really thank Joss for all her work that she's put into the development of this strategy, as well as the other members who are part of the working group. And what we've landed on, as you can see, is our vision is that Aboriginal children, families and communities are empowered to choose their own futures from secure and sustained foundations provided by ACCOs. This strategy is there to provide a framework of how communities will work together with and support Western Australian ACCOs to achieve self-determination, to create safe and healthy families and communities. And how we're going to do that is through the pillars of cultural safety and governance, partnerships and economic opportunities. So we wanted a pretty holistic approach and not to narrow it down too tightly, so that we could be sure that we're achieving these outcomes across all aspects of the work that we do. So how are we going to get there? What you can see on the diagram, these are the actions that have been identified by the project working group as our initial actions for the implementation of the strategy. So we want to know what's out there. We want to get a really good understanding of the strengths and opportunities that are in Western Australia for our ACCO sector. We will be looking to co-design and implement an ACCO strategy, accountability, monitoring and evaluation framework, establishing an Aboriginal decision-making body embedded into the Department of Communities, co-designing and implementing an Aboriginal engagement framework, and co-designing and implementing an ACCO commissioning framework. As well as that, we will also be looking at what does phase 2 of our implementation of our strategy look like. We are currently going through our internal review and approvals process. So we are hoping that we will be launching this strategy within the first half of 2022. That's a really brief snapshot of where we're at. There's been an immense amount of work put in, as I said, from the project working group on this one. We are currently engaging with our internal stakeholders as well as key external stakeholders across government for their feedback on the strategy. And then what we will do is we will meet with our project working group just to ensure that the integrity of the group is maintained when we launch this product. And hopefully that will then set the foundations for the department to have really clear goals on how we will engage and improve our service delivery so that it's more culturally appropriate and secure for our Aboriginal clients.
Great, thanks Jade, and thanks for that overview. As I said at the beginning, part of this today is giving you some broad information. We're really keen to kind of also ensure that we get to some questions from you all, and we'll get to them soon. But certainly next I'd like to invite Amanda, Marie and Ginny from Yilgarnup, who are going to provide an overview of their experience as the only current Aboriginal community controlled organisation providing out-of-home care services. And Amanda, over to you and your team, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting us to present today. So my name's Amanda. I'm the Executive Manager of Service Delivery with Yilgarnup.
And my name's Ginny Dingo. I'm the Cultural Practice Leader at Yilgarnup.
Also in the room, just so you know, we have Marie, who is our Executive Director of the Cultural Unit, and Dawn, who is our who is our CEO.
Yes, so to start off, we'll actually do our acknowledgement to country. Nalakarit wajak nyunga mor kain karat nija buja. We acknowledge that our office stands on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and that they are the original custodians and maintain a continuing connection to the land, the waters and the sky of this place. We acknowledge the enduring resilience of Noongar people. We pay our respects to elders past and present and emerging leaders. We seek their guidance and wisdom in pursuing our organisation's vision of nurturing our children to flourish.
So we just wanted to start by giving a bit of background about Yawgenup and who we are. So as Mark has mentioned, at the moment we are the only ACCO that is providing out-of-home care service in WA. We are led by a board that it has strong Noongar leaders, and we have a proud Noongar woman as our CEO. So our leadership of the organisation is really cemented in strong Aboriginal people leading the direction of our organisation. We've been providing out-of-home care for services and other services for over 30 years. And we predominantly provide out-of-home care or foster care services to Aboriginal people on Noongar country. Our vision is really to nurture our children to flourish, and we do this by empowering Aboriginal children and families to grow strong in themselves, in their culture and in their future. In order to do that, for us, cultural connection is really at the heart of everything we do. It's really important for children to know who they are, to know where they've come from, to know how they fit in with their family. So culture remains at the heart of everything that we do, and it guides all of our work.
And that's done through Every Child has a cultural plan, so we ensure that the cultural plan covers all that.
Just some general statistics, because it helps I guess give a picture about, you know, what's difficult and challenging and what are some of the real benefits of providing out-of-home care as an ACCO. So currently there is about 57% of children in out-of-home care are Aboriginal, despite the fact that they make up, Aboriginal children make up less than 10% of the overall population in WA. In some regional areas, particularly the Kimberleys, that's much closer to the high 90% and 100% of children in care being Aboriginal. There are statistics that show that Aboriginal children are entering out-of-home care at a younger age and that they're staying in out-of-home care for a longer amount of time, and that the number of Aboriginal carers, particularly when compared to the number of Aboriginal children in out-of-home care, is quite low. So last year, 2020 to 2021, there was about 102 registered Aboriginal foster carers from over 1,500 registered carers. So it's really important to increase the representation and the number of Aboriginal carers providing care.
At Yawgenup, we have 52 households, 2/3 are Aboriginal, 1/3 non-Aboriginal, and within that third, half of them are Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal carers of Aboriginal children, like they are the parents. Actually, they are parents of Aboriginal children, so they have their own children that are Aboriginal.
So all of our carers are really strongly connected to the Aboriginal community, whether that's through marriage, through their own children, or through being Aboriginal. We wanted to talk about some of the strengths and some of the positives about being an ACCO providing out-of-home care. So one of our strongest strengths is the connection that we have to the Aboriginal community, particularly the Noongar community, but we have connections right across the state with Aboriginal communities that we can call on to gain support for children that are off country but on Noongar country, to make sure that they still have some connections back to their community and their land. This really helps us to know who the children are that are in the care of Yawgenup, but we know their families, we know their history. We are able to, when we get a referral for a child, identify we have other children that are related to them or family of them already in Yawgenup care, or be able to identify family that we can then refer back to the department to potentially look into to support kinship or family arrangements. Our focus at Yawgenup is always on reunification and always on providing kinship placements and family placements where we can. We do a lot of work to work with the department and internally to really support getting children back home safely as quickly as possible. We also do a lot of work in supporting Aboriginal traditions, customs, ways of being, ways of doing, recognising Aboriginal parenting styles and really celebrating those differences and the contribution that that brings to the children. And so that is one of the real strengths that we provide. There are a couple of other strengths, if we can just go on to the next slide. So, like I said before, we have really good connections across the across the state and to a whole range of communities, and this really helps us in supporting our young people to have those connections so that when they leave care, they're leaving care going back to their family, knowing who they are and where they fit within their family and within their community. The majority of children leave care and go back home. They go back to their family, they go back to where they know. So it's really important to have those connections. We're also able to advocate across many government departments and with other CSOs and other organisations around what we believe is best for Aboriginal children, for Aboriginal families, and for the Aboriginal culture, and doing things in a way that is culturally safe for Aboriginal children and families.
And we do this a lot because we have Aboriginal people at work at Yilgarn that have networks right across the state. So if we may not know the family, but we can connect with them.
And we also really able to provide the support to our carers that is done in a culturally safe way that is relevant to them and that they understand and supports them to continue to be a carer. There are obviously some challenges though being in this space as an ACCO and providing out-of-home care, you know, particularly given the history of out-of-home care. So some of those challenges, and you know, one of the ones that you're going to come across and we come across regularly is around relationship management, and that can be really hard. There are relationships involved with out-of-home care. So you've got carers and birth families, you've got our staff and carers, our staff and birth families, us and the department. All of that coming together can make relationships difficult. This is compounded by being, you know, the Aboriginal community is a relatively small community, so everyone knows everyone. So that can make those relationships even more difficult to manage. And then if you add being on a regional or remote town into that, it makes it harder again. You know, the children are normally within fairly close proximity to their family, particularly in regional towns. And so the way that you manage those relationships and the way that you have those connections is really important to being successful. The department's ways of working don't always align with Aboriginal cultural ways, and the decision making as it stands at the moment predominantly lies with the department. So there can be times when you know, we feel like we are needing to educate or work more with the department to help them understand our point of view and why we're advocating so hard for a particular way, because that way works better for the Aboriginal community and the families and the children that we're working with. There is really comprehensive legislation and service standards that need to be met to provide out-of-home care. There's, you know, the Better Care, Better Service standards, which have a whole range of standards that need to be met, that you're monitored against, and that, you know, staff, carers, children are interviewed and spoke to about how you're managing and meeting those standards. And then obviously there's legislative standards that are also difficult and I guess time consuming, and you need to make sure that you've got the right staff and the right systems and processes in place to be able to meet those standards and to be able to maintain those standards as you move through.
And there are quite a few standards, you know, 11 standards, which is assessed every 18. 18 years, every 2 years, yes. So sometimes those can be quite hard to meet, especially when the culture of our people, as well as coming up against the culture of the department and things like that. So it's very difficult sometimes.
Another difficulty is around attracting and retaining Aboriginal carers. So it's really important that the way that you engage, recruit and assess carers is done in a culturally appropriate way and using really culturally safe techniques and assessment processes. And that can be a bit different to how others assess their carers. There are also some real challenges for Aboriginal people in being able to meet those assessments with simple things like being able to complete the 395 clearances because they don't have birth certificates, and the challenges of being able to work with them to get those identification requirements alone can be quite difficult.
And all the screening is exactly the same as the department the way that we work, but we work differently in the fact that we work at the pace of the carer, and we also work with community references.
Some other challenges that we face is the perception that ACCOs are not as mature as other CSOs, or that we're not as sophisticated enough to provide safe and ongoing care arrangements for children. It is a constant tagline, I guess, that we hear, that we are always then going back and saying, actually, that's not true. This is really the strengths of Aboriginal community controlled organisations, and we are strong and we are capable, and we just need the chance to be able to do it in a way that meets our families and our community's needs, and not the way that it has always been done and isn't getting the outcomes that we are looking for. Historically, the service models have been really rigid that we've been contracted to provide, and they didn't really support Aboriginal culture, parenting styles, family structures, and they were very much focused on, out-of-home care rather than finding family and reunification. We've done and had a lot of conversations with, Mark and the team over the last couple of years, and have been assured that that is changing. So we're really looking forward to seeing those changes eventuate and in action. And I think the other real challenge that we get is being seen by the community, by the families, as being an extension of the department. We work really hard to say that, yes, we're contracted by the department, but we are not the department. Our ways of working, our ways of doing what we do are really different to that of the department, but we've also achieved some really great outcomes because we're doing things in a way that meets the needs of the communities that we're working in, the families that we're working with, and the children, that we are growing into adults that hopefully have really strong life outcomes. The last thing we wanted to touch on is why we think it's important that more ACCOs join us in this space in providing out-of-home care. So ACCOs are really the best placed to be able to provide those culturally safe, secure care arrangements for children, to make sure that children are connected to their family, they're connected to their community, they understand their history and their heritage, and they're really proud of that. There's a lot of times that we're asked, well, what do you do that is culturally different to what a CSO does? And the answer to that is everything. Everything we do is based on culture. Our carers are Aboriginal. Culture is embedded in the homes. It's not an add-on. It's not something that we have to think about, or how are we going to do this, because it is just what we do. It's how we live and it's how we breathe. We understand the importance of cultural connections, and the fact that those connections and children understanding their identity, their history, who they are in their community, the difference that that makes in the life outcomes of the children is really significant, and we understand that and we support that, and that is at the forefront of everything we do. And finally, Aboriginal people and organisations providing care, providing support to Aboriginal people are best placed to succeed in engaging with the families, being able to celebrate their strengths, being able to address their struggles and their challenges in a way that is culturally safe, in a way that they can relate to and understand, and in a way that values them as carers and as Aboriginal people. So that's all from us. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak, and we'll stick around if there's any questions, more than happy to answer them.
Good. Okay, we are back. Thank you, Amanda, Marie and Ginny, for that very balanced overview. We really appreciate it. I know that there's some challenges, and I think you really articulated that really well, and really thank you for giving your experience to the wider group. So thank you very much for that. It does now bring us time to do some questions. We do have some questions through on the chat already, and Nikki and Sandy, who are here in the room with us, are going to help moderate some of those questions. I will let people know that I do need to leave a little bit early today to be on a panel for another webinar. But Amber will be here along with the rest of the team to remain to answer any questions that you had. And I'll just reiterate again that as I mentioned before, if we can't answer some of the questions, or we can't get to some of the questions today, we will be providing them all to you in writing post this event if we can't get to them today. So again, thank you for those that have asked questions already. I encourage you to continue to ask those questions, and we will head over to Nikki to ask the first question.
So the first question is, will all 4 types be procured in all regions?
Yes, the answer is yes to that. We would like to see all care types in all regions across the state, and as well to look at, how the individual differences of those regions need to be reflected in some of the way that those care types are delivered. But in general, those 4 care types are what we are looking for in each of the regions across the whole state, if possible.
Will houses be provided?
So the department will provide houses in some instances for some of those care types. Yes, obviously when we're talking about community-based foster care, we're talking about that type of care occurring in the houses, in the family houses of families within the community, and certainly in the instances of group home care and temporary care houses, the department will be looking to provide those houses to undertake those care types. But again, part of that will come down to some of the individual negotiations with organisations as well. Some organisations through this process and through this consultation have already asked the question of, well, what if we want to use our own house? We have, property ourselves. How does that work if we want to utilise our own property, particularly in the regions where they might have property already in a really good location with really good support services around those properties. So that will become part of those individual negotiations if organisations are awarded contracts through this process.
This is from Anne Hawke. Is the department releasing existing kinship carers, or are you talking about new kinship carers?
At this moment in time, we are talking about new kinship carers. It's not to say that that's not part of the long-term strategy, Anne, but for this instance and for these contracts at the moment, we are talking about new kinship carers.
And a follow-up question to that from Anne. With new family carers, will ACCOs use a general foster care assessment, or will they be assessing them against the family carer assessment tool?
Emma, do you have a view on this one?
I think we have to take that on notice.
Yeah.
That question hasn't come up before, so it's a really worthwhile question. And I think there'd be numerous factors we'd have to take into account. So can we take that on notice and get back to you? Thank you, Anne. Great question.
As new providers, will there be lead funding to get the organisations ready?
So one of the things through this process that we're aware will need to happen is there will need to be a transition time between old contracts and new contracts, where there might be previous providers and new providers. And so certainly as part of any awarding of contracts and any negotiation, the discussion around transition and lead-in time will take place with each individual organisation to see what is going to be required and to what extent. There's a lot of factors. That is a very broad and short answer to a very complicated and complex question that really needs to look at the whole spectrum in regards to old organisations, new organisations, organisations that are transitioning into new arrangements. So old organisations going into new arrangements, totally brand new organisations. If there's going to be any transition of carers or children, you know, what does that need? So there is, I'm simplifying what is a very broad, which is a very complex area that we will need to work through, and I've already started some of that process by gathering together some of the data that we need to inform how that needs to look moving forward. And I'll also say that we are also working with some of our partners like Yorganup, like the Noongar Family Safety Wellbeing Council around what a transition plan kind of needs to look like as well. So we're starting those conversations around what some of those transitions need to look like, from the transitions of Aboriginal children in the care of community service organisations, transitioning to the care of Aboriginal community controlled organisations, to work more broadly we're doing around transitions of contracts as well. So as I said, very complex, but we are certainly starting some of that work.
This is again from Anne. Will the draft ACCO strategy be used to guide the current tender process?
We are, thanks Anne for that question. We're working very closely with commissioning on what's within the draft strategy and what the aims of that strategy are, so that we are working really closely. We've got a good relationship with the commissioning team so that we can start looking at ideas and ways of working, and that the whole department is aware of the work that we've done on the ACCO strategy, and we are building those relationships across the department to ensure that that is informing the work that is being done across all of commissioning. Thank you.
And Margaret Collard spoke of co-design earlier. How or did the department co-design the service specifications for these tenders with Aboriginal people?
I suppose for me, it was the co-design is a new piece of work that's coming out of the ACCO strategy to co-design and implement the strategy in terms of a monitoring and evaluation framework. So in terms of co-design for the actual commissioning piece, Mark, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. And so, I mean, Margaret was talking, and Margaret and Jay were talking about co-design from the ACCO strategy perspective. What I spoke about before is the fact that we did some design labs with the sector, including with Aboriginal community controlled organisations specifically as well. And it was mentioned by Amanda before as well, the fact that part of our approach this time is to be really flexible and not rigid with our approach, and to be led by our engagement with ACCOs about what some of that needs to look like. We have come up with some very broad service types. We have not been specific about the way in which those service types or types of care need to be delivered, and what that type of care needs to look like from either an individual perspective, an organisational perspective, or a regional perspective. And that has been done really deliberately so we can be informed by those who are more knowledgeable than us, who work and operate within those regions, who work and operate within these communities, to tell us what that needs to look like from a delivery perspective. And so that's the approach that we've taken so far. And obviously our engagement specifically with Aboriginal community controlled organisations will further refine that as we move forward.
And So a question about providing some more details on the planned tender process.
Sure. So our planned tender process with community service organisations is that we will have draft specifications of tenders out to community service organisations at the end of this quarter, which is the end of March. There will be a 4-week time period for which organisations can provide feedback on those draft tender documents. Once that feedback is received and modifications made to the tender documents, they will then go out fairly soon after that through a proper tender process. It will go on to Tenders WA, and there'll be a period of time for which then organisations have to respond to those tenders. And that will be anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks on top of the 4-week time frame that organisations will have with the draft tender specifications as well. You would have noted before my discussion about a different procurement approach to engaging with Aboriginal community controlled organisations, which is about a direct approach procurement. And we'll certainly be starting that as soon as we finish with this webinar today. As I said, we will be in contact with organisations individually about the discussions that we need to have to see. People might listen to this today and say, actually, we thought we were interested. What you've told us today makes us think we're not quite there yet. We're not ready. We're not interested at the moment. And so certainly we will be, we will certainly respect that. Those that are interested in engaging in further discussions will be having those one-to-one conversations with those Aboriginal community controlled organisations in the coming week or two. We do want to move on this quite quickly. We do want to have those conversations quite quickly with interested organisations who are wanting to take that next step and have that next lot of conversation with us. And so certainly we'll be looking to move that forward and have those discussions and the direct approach discussions with Aboriginal community controlled organisations in parallel to the tender process that is going out to community service organisations.
Will reunification be a goal for all services?
Reunification should be a goal at all times in any out-of-home care placement. So I would like to hope that reunification is always the goal for us. I think, we have seen some shifts, and I'll say some because it's not happening across the board, but we've seen some shifts where we're also starting to really review and look at children who are currently on orders until 18 to really look at the individual situations with children to say, is out-of-home care placements the best placement for these children? Has things shifted within their family? Should we be revisiting that reunification? But certainly when we've got children coming into care, when we've got them within family care, and when we've got them on 2-year orders, really looking towards reunification or continuing to make sure that that is in the forefront of our mind should always be our goal. And we would certainly be looking at services being more active in this space within the new contracts.
Can these ACCOs also be considered as registered entities? I'm not really sure.
I'm not really sure of the clarification required. I might have to come back to you on that one. I need to seek some clarification of the definition.
There's another question from Anne. Given NGOs are not currently providing family care arrangements, has the department considered the time it will take to find and assess family carers? Is the expectation that ACCOs will take on existing general foster carers and replace these with family carers? If not, will the department fund the ACCO while it is finding and assessing family carers?
Can you just repeat that again for me? Sorry, there was a bit to that.
That's okay. So it's about the transition from.
Yes, yep.
Is the expectations that ACCOs will take on existing general foster carers and move to replace these with family carers? If not, will the department fund the ACCO while it is finding and assessing new family carers?
So when it comes to kind of family carers, you know, each individual situation is going to be different. When a child comes into care or there is concerns about a child's safety, there may or may not be family members already identified through that process. And so certainly we would be looking at a situation where we have the ability for Aboriginal community controlled organisations to undertake new assessments, and we will get clarification on what that assessment looks like from a family care perspective. But certainly would be looking at situations where they are funded to provide those placements, which would include the assessment and then the support of those family carers. We'd need to talk individually about, you know, whether that means, you know, replacing, you know, existing foster carers to family carers. I think, and that'd be something we need to we'll probably look at giving some further information in this to give some clarifying information around that.
Can I make an extra comment as well? Look, it would be unreasonable to expect that you've got a pool of carers that are going to be related to certain children. You may actually get to that point, and I guess the other category of carer assessment that we have is a community carer assessment, and that was something I was thinking of in response to your question, Anne. So there's certainly some policy work for us to be thinking about there, but generally we'd be looking for family to be found and assessed specific to the child. So I think that would happen as the case goes along, if you like, because as Mark said, part of our early work with families before children come into care should be identifying a network. So I would anticipate that we would have family, but we would be wanting to partner with you because often we don't. And that's part of the point of having ACCOs involved, in that you will have those connections that we don't have. So it's far more likely that you'll be able to find family and then assess them. Certainly for me, something that's that I've been thinking about since your question is the timeframes. And I know that a general care assessment can take a really long time. And one of the things the department has at its disposal is the ability to do an urgent assessment effectively. So that's something that we're really going to have to think about, because we want to set up the situation where children can get into ACCO care really quickly. So we need to think about the policy enablers and the legislative enablers to make sure that we can do that as quickly as possible in the best interests of children.
Thanks, Emma.
This is more of a comment, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything to it. Some of the smaller ACCOs cannot compete with large providers in the competitive space.
Look, and that's certainly something we're aware of, and which is why we wanted to do the direct approach commissioning for ACCOs, because part of the conversation is understanding where are those small ACCOs at, what is it that they think they can realistically deliver, what are some of the areas where they would like to learn more about, and where can they be supported to get to where they want to go in the future around a certain delivery of care. And certainly that's why we wanted to do this approach, and certainly that's why we've separated this approach out from a competitive tender process. And so our hope is that our engagement with those small Aboriginal community controlled organisations will really be the basis for looking at how they can become involved without, I suppose, the concern around competing with really large organisations that have a lot of experience in this space.
And then a question, can you please explain the role of PACSN?
So the role of PACSN is around the procurement. So obviously, as part of any commissioning process, there is a lot of documentation and processes that need to be followed from a government perspective. And we have engaged PACSN to ensure that all of those are completed and done so in a timely manner. So they'll be drawing up the procurement plans, the draft tender documents, obviously in conjunction with ourselves, all of the draft tender documents. They'll be taking it through all of the process with the Department of Finance that needs to occur. They'll be helping schedule and writing up all of the evaluation reports. They'll be scheduling the evaluation panels, and they'll be part of the process all the way through, and are a resource for us to use, given the fact that there is a lot of change in this space to how it was delivered before. We're looking to make quite a bit of a change not only the process that we're applying here in this commissioning stage, but really the process and the approach that we're applying overall to how we want things to look moving forward. And so that does take a fair bit of work in doing in the background, and that is their role in this process. But they are taking the lead, they are taking the direction from ourselves, and certainly the feedback that we get along the way through all of our engagement with the sector is also informing what we're passing on to PACSN.
Will existing houses or properties, for example, Bamborough House, be handed back to ACOS to provide these services? It's a question from Donna.
I don't know Bamborough House.
No.
I'm not too sure about Bamborough House. I have a feeling that it is a departmental run residential care facility. It is, yeah, so someone's nodding. So the departmental residential care facilities will still be running. Department will still be running residential care facilities around the regions. And so the houses that we are talking about are in addition, are different houses to those. Some non-government organisations who are providing care in the regions already have some of these houses. And so part of that will be around, I suppose, the transition of these houses between agencies and organisations. And in some instances, it will be the acquirement of different properties. Obviously, part of being a part of the Department of Communities is that we do have what was a Department of Housing within our department as well. And so we're working closely with our housing colleagues around some of those properties. And part of that will also come down to how many different types of care are delivered in each particular region as well. So, but certainly where it won't be about the handover of departmental run residential facilities, it will be about the handover of houses that are currently operated by other community service organisations at the moment being transferred across. Again, it's very region specific, it's very individual, and we'll need to go through that as we move through this process.
Will you require partnerships? ACOs are often in a poor power dynamic in these forced partnerships. How will you ensure parity?
So we're certainly not requiring partnerships, either from an ACO perspective or from a CSO perspective. We are aware that in the past, and not only just within the areas of child protection, but across other human service sectors, that partnerships between CSOs and ACOs have resulted in a very difficult power imbalance where ACOs have been really left high and dry at times in regards to those partnerships. It hasn't been equal. At times what was said was going to happen wasn't followed through either. And so it's not going to be a requirement for us. However, certainly if they are entered into, the principles of partnerships and the requirements of evidence of partnerships will be a lot different to what has occurred previously. And so, but it won't necessarily be a requirement for these for this process.
We have some clarifying information about the registered entities question, but we still might have to take it on notice. So this came from Donna, and it's regarding the placement of Aboriginal children as per the consultation requirement prior to placement.
Oh, he says Aboriginal representative organisations.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll just leave you. Sorry, guys, I do have to head off to another webinar. I just quickly like to say I really thank you all for joining us today. These guys will continue with your questions. Thanks to my colleagues here and also to Jorgen for joining us today. And we'll hand over about the AROs.
Thank you for the question, Donna. In relation to Aboriginal representative organisations, that's obviously part of the legislative amendment bill for the Children and Community Services Act of 2004. So at the moment, that piece of work actually sits in Aboriginal Outcomes Division of Department of Communities. We're currently looking, the Premier's announced the two pilot sites being Armidale and the Kimberley region, and we're currently doing some work across what that would look like in those locations. So that is looking to consider, it's about consultation with Aboriginal representative organisations at the point of placement. That's not yet live as part of the legislative amendment bill. However, we're looking at obviously piloting that in 2 sites to then obviously see what that looks like for a statewide opportunity.
Go back, what was the question? I just want to, because
Yeah,
you said what the Aboriginal representative organisations are.
Let me scroll that up. So will and can these ACCOs also be considered as registered entities? So if somebody service provider out of home care.
In terms of that question, the timeline of procurement for the out-of-home care ACCO sector now is not aligned yet to the ARO work. So that doesn't necessarily mean that into the future that the ACCO that might be providing an out-of-home care service might also then be an ARO. So the specs of obviously being an ARO needs to be an Aboriginal community controlled organisation. So in answer to your question, it's a possible future element.
I feel like maybe we need to get some legal advice on it. The only thing I'm concerned about is conflict of interest. But I think that's something that we're going to have to navigate in regions anyway, because of so many relationships across. So I'm sure that's been considered in the ARO process, but I just wanted, I think we should partly take that on notice. It's a really good question, and we'll get some legal advice in relation to that.
And then we have another question from Anne about family carers. If an ACCO proposes a family carer and has assessed them as suitable, who will have the final say on if the carer is registered or not?
So that's another interesting question, because the carer approval process at the moment, sector agencies generally do their own approval, and the department does their own approval. It's been a fairly fraught space, and at one point we were trying to get a united process of carer approvals. And I do see opportunity into the future to revisit that. I think the sector actually, and so I would include ACCOs, and I would include Yorganup, I think the sector are better at the way in which this is done than how the department does it. And so I think there is opportunity to be partnering so that we have some sort of consistency, whether we're looking at supporting each other or having a multi-agency panel. I definitely don't see that the department would be the power holder there. I would like to see that that's something that is cross-sectoral. But that is a piece of work we're looking at. The department has recently appointed a Director of Family and Foster Care, and the whole care approval process, we feel within the department is quite fraught. And as I say, I feel like the sector are doing this far more successfully. So I can't completely answer your question, other than to say I think there is scope that this could be managed with the department's involvement, ideally, but as an equal partner. I don't think this is something that we should be running. But then having said that, as a new agency, if you did want to use our panel process, then that's something that we could talk about as well. So there wouldn't be an expectation that you had your own panel process. We do have one, even if you wanted to transition to that over time, where you did get to a point where you felt you could do your own panel process. So I think there's lots of options there. You could even partner with Yorganup, for example, and look at how they could support you. I don't know if Yorganup wanted to make a comment there, given you currently panel your own carer applicants, would there be an opportunity to have Yorganup make a comment? I'm seeing some nods on the screen. So
we're open to. But we're open to supporting ACCOs enter this, out-of-home care in any way that we can. So if that was something that someone wanted to talk to us about, we're definitely happy to have those conversations.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks, team.
That's all the questions.
That's all the questions. We don't have any other questions at the moment. So given that, I want to give some time, because people might be thinking we've got loads of questions. I want to give you a bit of time, because we still do have a little bit of time. If anyone wants to throw in any questions or even any comments, don't feel like you need to restrict yourselves to comments, to questions. If you want to make a comment,
Yorganut would just like to make a comment and to acknowledge the work of the Noongar Family Safety Wellbeing Council. They've been really supportive of us to get to where we are, and so thank you to them. And we would like to provide similar support to other ACCOs to be able to get them into this space and supporting their family, their children, their community.
Thanks, Amanda. That's it's a fabulous situation that we're in, that we do have the maturity of Yorganut. They've been providing out-of-home care for such a long time, and they're very willing to support the other agencies as you grow into this role. So thank you very much, Yorganut, for being so willing to be part of that. I really do appreciate that. You've got another question? Here we go. If we leave some time, it always happens. It's great.
It's actually just a comment from Linda Phillips. So she has said, these webinars are a great way of communicating with us. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you for your comment, Linda. And I'm glad, thank you for the feedback. It's great that it has been helpful today. And we are open to, we really want to be communicating. We want to be as open and transparent as we can be. We want to set this up for success. We really want to see, I think it's been a theme of today, we really do want to see more than one Aboriginal community controlled organisation providing care to Aboriginal children. So this is a fantastic opportunity to see growth in Aboriginal business. We really want to see that opportunity, but more importantly, we think it's vital that Aboriginal children are cared for by Aboriginal people and by Aboriginal organisations. So this is a fabulous opportunity, and whether we get there immediately or we grow, I think it'll probably be both. We'll see some agencies come online straight away and others will grow over time. We don't want to set anyone up to fail either, because we know that won't be great for kids. So however it looks for your agency, please have courage. We really do want to walk alongside you, and we have Yorganut that can walk alongside you as well.
So this might be the last question, again from Anne. Can the complex care arrangements be provided by family carers?
Yes. And in fact, that's part of why we are recommissioning and trying to put dollars around children's needs, because actually we may well have that reality right now. Nana might have put her hand up to care for a child, and that child could be exceptionally complex and have very expensive needs. And so that's really a part of the whole point of recommissioning, so that we can make sure that children have their needs met in whatever situation they're in. So yes, thank you for that question, absolutely.
Yeah.
No more questions. Fantastic. Look, well, thank you so much for your time today. Your time is really important, and we really value that you've engaged with us. And we're really delighted that so many agencies across the state have expressed an interest and are really keen to move forward in providing care to Aboriginal children. It's our heartfelt commitment to see Aboriginal children cared for in your agencies, and we do want to partner with you on that going forward. Thank you to our colleagues at Yorganut. Thank you for being present today and for your ongoing commitment to support your partner agencies going forward. It's a bright future for Aboriginal children. We want to see less Aboriginal children in care, and we know that by having children cared for by Aboriginal people, you're far more likely to get Aboriginal children home, and you're far more likely to see Aboriginal children thrive for those that can't go home, because you're able to get connections that will be for life. And we see at the moment that most children who are exiting care often don't have the connections that they need. And so we know that they need to be connected to kin and to country and to culture. And we know that really only Aboriginal people can do that completely effectively. So thank you for being part of today, and thank you for your commitment going forward. I think that's it from us. Unless there's anything else, thank you to my colleagues here, and thank you